I never meant to fall in love with him, but the night my mom called from London and said she would stay away for another month, I looked across the dinner table at my stepdad, David, and realized something was terribly wrong with me. Because for the first time, I wish we were a real couple. Welcome to Heartbeat English Stories, the channel where you improve your English through emotional and dramatic stories. Today's story is filled with secrets, guilt, forbidden feelings, and painful choices. Listen carefully, relax, and enjoy the story. And don't forget to subscribe for more English listening stories every week. My name is Emily, and this story started when I was 20 years old. At the time, I was living with my mother in a quiet neighborhood outside Chicago. It was just the two of us for most of my life. My parents divorced when I was 8, and after that, my father slowly disappeared from my world. Sometimes he sent birthday messages, sometimes he forgot. I learned very early not to expect too much from people, especially from men. My mom, Karen, worked as a marketing executive for a large company. She was intelligent, ambitious, and always busy. Growing up, I admired her a lot. She worked hard to give me a comfortable life, and I knew she loved me. But love from my mother often came in strange forms: credit card gifts, quick phone calls, notes on the kitchen counter, "Sorry, sweetheart, business trip again." Even when she was sitting right next to me, her mind usually seemed somewhere else. Then, 2 years ago, everything changed. That was when she met David. I still remember the first night I saw him. Mom invited him over for dinner on a rainy Friday evening. I had just returned home from college for the weekend, exhausted after final exams. I walked into the kitchen wearing old sweatpants and messy hair, expecting a quiet dinner. Instead, I saw a tall man standing beside my mother, smiling while helping her cook pasta. "Emily," Mom said excitedly, "this is David." He turned toward me and smiled warmly, not the fake smile adults usually gave young people, a real smile. "Nice to meet you," he said. "Your mom talks about you all the time." David was 38, but somehow he looked younger. He had dark hair, calm blue eyes, and the kind of confident voice that made people immediately trust him. At first, I didn't think much about him. He was just another boyfriend. My mother had dated several men after the divorce, but none of them stayed long. Some were arrogant. Some ignored me completely. Others tried too hard to impress me. David was different. He never forced conversations. He never acted like he wanted to replace my father. He simply treated me like a real person. And honestly, that was enough. Over the next few months, he became part of our lives very quickly. He fixed things around the house. He cooked dinner when Mom worked late. He remembered small details about me: my favorite coffee order, my university schedule, even the name of my childhood dog. One afternoon, my car broke down near campus during heavy rain. I called my mother 3 times, but she didn't answer. Finally, I called David. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I know you're probably busy. Send me your location," he interrupted gently. "I'll be there." Less than 40 minutes later, he arrived. I still remember sitting in his warm car while rain hit the windows around us. I was freezing and stressed, but somehow, being near him made me feel calm. "You don't have to handle everything alone, Emily," he said. That sentence stayed in my mind for days, because nobody had ever really said that to me before. A year later, my mother married him. The wedding was small and beautiful. Everyone looked happy, including me. At least, I thought I was happy. After the marriage, David moved into our house permanently. At first, everything felt normal, comfortable even, but slowly, tiny things started changing inside me. Small moments began affecting me more than they should have. The way he laughed when I made sarcastic jokes, the way he listened carefully when I talked, the way he always noticed when something was wrong with me, even before my mother did. Especially my mother, she became even busier after the wedding. Her company expanded internationally, and suddenly she was traveling almost every week. London, Singapore, New York, Tokyo. Sometimes she stayed away for 10 days at a time. Meanwhile, David and I spent more and more time together at home. At first, it felt innocent. We watched movies together, cooked dinner together, talked late at night about life, relationships, and work. Sometimes I caught myself looking forward to those evenings a little too much, and that terrified me. One night, we were sitting on the couch watching an old movie while rain poured outside. I was wearing pajamas and resting under a blanket. Half asleep, David looked over at me and smiled. "You look exhausted," he said softly. "College is killing me. You're working too hard." There was something about the way he looked at me in that moment. Gentle, protective, safe. My chest suddenly felt tight. I quickly looked away. That was the first moment I realized something dangerous was happening. After that, I started noticing everything. His smell after shaving, the sound of his voice downstairs in the morning, the way my heart reacted whenever he touched my shoulder casually. I hated myself for it. Every single time those feelings appeared, guilt immediately followed. "This is wrong. He's your stepfather. He loves your mother. Your mother trusts both of you." I repeated those thoughts constantly inside my head, hoping the feelings would disappear, but they didn't. If anything, they became stronger. And the worst part, I think David had started noticing the tension too. Sometimes, our conversations suddenly became awkward. Sometimes he avoided eye contact. Sometimes I caught him staring at me for half a second too long before quickly looking away. But neither of us said anything. We continued pretending everything was normal until the business trip that changed everything. My mother called one Sunday evening while David and I were eating dinner together. Her voice sounded tired through the speakerphone. "Bad news," she sighed. "The London project is taking longer than expected. I'll be staying another 4 weeks." 4 weeks? I repeated. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." "I know." David stayed quiet across the table. After the call ended, silence filled the room. I slowly looked up at him. He looked back at me, and suddenly, something shifted between us. Something deeper, more dangerous. That night, I went to bed feeling nervous for reasons I didn't want to understand, because deep inside, I already knew my feelings were no longer innocent. The storm started on a Thursday evening. At first, it was only rain, soft rain against the windows, but by midnight, the wind had become violent. Tree branches hit the roof, thunder shook the house, and flashes of lightning lit up the dark sky every few seconds. I was upstairs in my room trying to study, but the noise made it impossible to concentrate. Then suddenly the power went out. Everything became black. I jumped slightly and looked around my dark room. "Great," I whispered. A few seconds later, I heard David's voice downstairs. "Emily, are you okay?" "I'm fine." I used my phone flashlight to walk carefully downstairs. The house felt strangely different without electricity. Quieter, smaller, more intimate. David was standing in the kitchen lighting candles. The warm orange light moved softly across his face. For some reason, my heart immediately started beating faster. "I found some candles in the garage," he said. "You're surprisingly prepared for a power outage." He smiled a little. "I grew up in Minnesota. Storms don't scare me." Another loud thunderclap shook the windows. I flinched slightly. David noticed. "You hate storms?" "Not exactly," I admitted. "I just hate being alone during storms." The words escaped my mouth before I could stop them. His expression softened immediately. "Well," he said gently, "you're not alone." That simple sentence affected me much more than it should have. I quickly looked away. Outside, rain crashed heavily against the house. Roads were already flooding, and according to the weather alerts on my phone, nobody was supposed to drive anywhere until morning. We were trapped at home together, and somehow, that realization made me nervous. David opened the refrigerator. "Looks like we should eat the ice cream before everything melts." I laughed. "Now that sounds like an emergency." For the next hour, we sat in the living room eating ice cream directly from the container while candles flickered around us. Honestly, it should have felt normal, safe, but nothing about us felt normal anymore. Every glance lasted too long. Every silence felt dangerous. I hated how aware I was of him, the way his sleeves were rolled up, the tired look in his eyes, the low sound of his voice whenever he spoke quietly. At one point, lightning flashed brightly through the windows, and instinctively, I moved closer to him on the couch, only slightly, but enough to notice. Enough for him to notice too. Neither of us moved away. The storm continued getting worse. Eventually, David stood up and checked his phone. No signal, he said. Looks like the storm damaged something nearby. Perfect, I joked weakly. We're basically living in a horror movie now. He laughed softly. I promise no monsters are coming. If only he knew. The real monster was already sitting beside him, me, my feelings, my thoughts, my inability to stop wanting something I should never want. I suddenly stood up. I should probably go to bed, but before I could walk away, another loud thunderclap exploded above the house. The lights outside flashed briefly, and without thinking I grabbed his arm. For 1 second, neither of us moved. I slowly realized my fingers were tightly holding him, too tightly. Embarrassed, I quickly let go. Sorry, I whispered, it's okay, but his voice sounded different, lower, more tense. I could feel the air changing between us again, that same dangerous tension we had both been avoiding for weeks. I sat back down slowly. My chest felt tight. Why was this happening to me? Why him? Out of everyone in the world, why did I have to develop feelings for the one person I could never have? David leaned back against the couch. Quietly, you've seemed stressed lately, he said after a while. I forced a smile. College. I don't think it's just college. I stayed silent. He looked at me carefully. You know you can talk to me, right? That almost broke me, because the truth was I wanted to talk to him about everything. About how confused I felt whenever he smiled at me. About how guilty I felt every time my mother called from another country while I secretly wished she would stay away longer. About how I kept imagining impossible things that made me hate myself afterward. I swallowed hard. Do you ever? I began softly, then I stopped. David looked at me. Do I ever what? I stared down at my hands. The storm outside sounded distant now compared to the noise inside my chest. Do you ever feel trapped? I asked quietly. He was silent for a moment. Sometimes, like your life became something completely different from what you expected. His eyes stayed on me. Yes, there was something emotional in his voice now. Something honest. For the first time, I realized David might also be lonelier than he appeared. I looked up slowly. The candlelight reflected softly in his eyes. When my mom travels, I admitted carefully. Sometimes this house feels strange. He nodded slowly. I know what you mean. No, I whispered. I don't think you do. The words escaped before I could stop them. His expression changed immediately. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm, too quiet. Emily, he said carefully. I could hear warning in his voice, and somehow, that made everything worse, because deep down, I already knew what he was trying not to say. We were crossing emotional lines neither of us understood anymore. I stood up quickly and walked toward the kitchen, pretending I needed water, but honestly, I was trying to breathe. My hands were shaking. A few seconds later, David followed me quietly. Emily, I turned around too fast. We were suddenly standing very close together, closer than we had ever stood before. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Rain hammered against the windows. Thunder echoed outside and inside the kitchen. Everything felt suspended in time. You should get some sleep, he said, finally, but his voice sounded strained, like he was forcing himself to stay calm. I nodded slowly, but I didn't move. Neither did he. My heart was beating so hard I thought he might hear it. Then his eyes dropped briefly toward my lips, only for a second, but I noticed, and I think he realized I noticed. That was the moment everything changed, not because anything happened, but because we both understood something silently. The feelings between us were real, terribly real. I stepped backward, Immediately, guilt crashed into me so suddenly it almost made me sick. My mother trusted us. She loved him. She loved me, and here we were, standing in the kitchen at midnight during a storm, looking at each other in a way we never should have. I should go upstairs, I whispered. David nodded once. Yeah, but his voice sounded distant. I turned around quickly and walked upstairs without looking back. Once inside my bedroom, I closed the door and leaned against it heavily. My entire body felt tense. What was wrong with me? Why hadn't I stopped this earlier? I sat on the edge of my bed while thunder shook the house again. Then I buried my face in my hands because the truth terrified me. Part of me had wanted him to stop me in the kitchen. Part of me had wanted him to say something impossible. And worst of all, I wasn't sure he would have resisted if I had confessed everything right there. I barely slept that night. Every time lightning flashed outside my window, I remembered the way he had looked at me. Not like a daughter, not even like family, like a woman. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath all the guilt and fear, I knew I had looked at him the exact same way. After the storm, things between David and me became painfully awkward. Not openly awkward, not enough for anyone else to notice, but every interaction felt dangerous now. We avoided being alone together whenever possible. If I entered the kitchen, he suddenly found reasons to leave. If we watched TV together, he sat farther away than before. Sometimes I caught him looking exhausted, like he hadn't slept properly in days. Honestly, neither had I. The guilt was eating me alive. I started avoiding my mother's phone calls because hearing her voice made me feel like a terrible person. She trusted me completely, and I was hiding feelings that could destroy our family. One afternoon, while David was outside fixing something in the garage, I sat alone in my room trying to study, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept replaying the storm, the kitchen, the way he looked at me. Finally, frustrated and emotional, I opened my notebook and started writing, not for anyone else, just for myself, or at least, that's what I told myself. I wrote everything I could never say out loud. How lonely I felt, how confused I was, how safe David made me feel, how guilty I felt every time I imagined impossible things. And finally, the sentence I hated most, I think I'm in love with him. The moment I finished writing it, shame crashed over me again. What was I doing? This wasn't romantic. This wasn't beautiful. It was selfish. Wrong. I quickly tore the page out of the notebook and shoved it deep inside my desk drawer. Then I left my room to clear my head. 2 hours later, my entire world collapsed. I came home from a walk and immediately heard shouting downstairs. My mother's voice, sharp, angry, terrified. Explain this to me right now. My blood froze instantly. Mom was supposed to return from London 3 days later. I slowly walked toward the living room, and there she was, standing beside the couch with tears in her eyes, holding the letter, my letter. For one horrible second, nobody moved. David stood near the window looking pale and tense. My mother looked at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. What is this? She asked shakily. I couldn't breathe. Mom, you're in love with my husband. The words hit like a physical slap. David stepped forward immediately. Karen, please calm down. Don't tell me to calm down, she shouted. I had never seen my mother like this before. Not cold, not busy, not emotionally distant, just hurt, deeply hurt. Tears filled my eyes immediately. I never wanted this, I whispered. Then why would you write something like this? I didn't mean for anyone to read it. My mother looked completely devastated. For the first time in years, she looked less like a powerful businesswoman and more like someone whose heart had been broken. She turned toward David slowly. And you? The silence that followed terrified me most, because suddenly I needed to know the answer too. Had I imagined everything? Or had he felt something real? David ran a hand across his face tiredly before finally speaking. I knew she was emotionally attached to me, The room became silent. I stared at him in shock. You knew? He looked at me sadly. Yes. Humiliation burned through my chest instantly. Oh my God, it wasn't your fault, Emily, he said carefully. But my mother looked horrified. How long has this been happening? Nothing happened, David said firmly. Don't lie to me. I'm not lying. He looked directly at her. I swear to you, Karen, I never crossed a line with her. My mother laughed bitterly through tears. You expect me to believe that? Yes. Then David said something that completely shocked me. I was actually planning to talk to you about this after your trip. I blinked in confusion. What? My mother looked equally confused. David took a slow breath. I noticed Emily becoming emotionally dependent on me months ago. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But after the storm, he paused heavily. I realized the situation was becoming unhealthy. Every word felt like a knife in my chest. Unhealthy, emotionally dependent. I suddenly felt small and embarrassed, not romantic, not special, just broken. David continued carefully. I didn't want to shame her or make her feel guilty. She's lonely, Karen. She's been lonely for a very long time. My mother's expression slowly changed. Less anger, more confusion. What are you talking about? David looked at her quietly. You're never here. The room went silent again. My mother stared at him. I work for this family. I know, David said softly. But Emily spent years emotionally abandoned. She didn't fall in love with me because I'm special. I felt tears running down my face now. She fell in love with attention, he said gently. Those words destroyed me, because deep inside, I knew he was right. He continued speaking carefully. I was actually looking at apartments near her university. I thought maybe giving her space, independence, and therapy support would help her separate emotionally from this house. My mother slowly sat down on the couch. For the first time, she looked genuinely shaken, not by jealousy, by guilt. I didn't know things were this bad, she whispered. I wiped my eyes angrily. Well, you were never here to notice. The moment I said it, silence filled the room again. My mother looked at me with pain in her eyes, and suddenly, I regretted everything. Not the feelings, the damage, the pain on her face, the destruction spreading through our family because I couldn't control my emotions. I'm sorry, I whispered weakly. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then David quietly placed the letter on the table. I think I should stay somewhere else tonight. My mother didn't stop him, and honestly, neither did I. As he walked toward the front door, he paused briefly. Then he looked back at me one final time. Not romantically, not secretly, just sadly, like someone saying goodbye to something that should never have existed. Then he left. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house. My mother and I sat in silence. Afterward, for a long time, finally, she spoke quietly. Why didn't you tell me you were hurting? I laughed bitterly through tears. When would I have told you? That question broke something inside her. I could see it immediately. For years, I blamed myself for being emotionally confused. But maybe loneliness changes people. Maybe attention becomes dangerous when you spend your whole life starving for it. A month later, I moved into a small apartment near campus. I also started therapy. At first, I hated it. Talking about emotions felt embarrassing, but slowly, I started understanding myself better. My attachment issues, my loneliness, my need for validation, and most importantly, the difference between love and emotional dependency. David and my mother stayed together. Surprisingly, therapy helped them too. My mother eventually reduced her travel schedule. For the first time in years, she started acting less like my provider and more like my mother. As for David, we barely spoke after that night, and honestly, that was probably for the best. Sometimes I still think about the storm, the candles, the kitchen, the almost confession. But now, when I remember those moments, I don't feel excitement anymore. I feel sadness, because I finally understand something important. I wasn't truly in love with my stepdad. I was in love with the feeling of finally being seen And when you spend your whole life emotionally invisible, that feeling can become dangerously addictive. Thank you for listening to Heartbeat English Stories. If you enjoyed today's emotional story, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment below. See you next time for another dramatic English listening story.